The courtroom smelled of polished wood and cold indifference. A dozen eyes stared at him, not with sympathy, but with quiet amusement. The boy's small hands trembled as he clutched the worn notebook, pages scribbled with secrets no child should ever carry. His voice cracked when he began to speak. He did it. He hurt me. A ripple of laughter erupted from the judge. Not a polite chuckle, but a sharp, biting laughter that sliced through the fragile courage the boy had mustered. Gasps filled the room, and for a heartbeat, everything froze. The boy felt his heart sink into the floor, his pain dismissed as a joke. He looked around, searching for someone, anyone, who would believe him. But the room was a sea of judgmental faces, indifferent lawyers, and smirking officials. Outside, the sky had darkened, clouds heavy with unshed rain. The boy had been dragged through this storm of disbelief for too long. Every pleading, every tear, every silent scream had ended in the same cruel echo: not enough evidence. Children lie. Imagination. Words meant to strip him of hope. And now, here, in this grand chamber where justice should have lived, his truth was mocked. But then, faint but unmistakable, a low rumble began to grow outside. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't the wind. It was something far more deliberate, far more alive. Engines revving in unison, tires gripping asphalt, a vibration that made the boy's chest tighten with both fear and awe. The laughter of the judge faltered for the first time. Outside, the world shifted, as if it too knew that balance had been broken. The boy's eyes widened. Through the courtroom windows, he saw them, 13 figures atop roaring motorcycles, leather jackets gleaming even under the stormy sky. They weren't just riders, they were a storm of justice, a brotherhood bound by honor and fury. And in that moment, the boy dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, someone would finally hear him. Because sometimes, the world's loudest laughter is drowned out by the roar of righteous engines. Ethan had never known a home that felt safe. From the moment he could remember, shadows had followed him, shadows that whispered cruelty in the guise of authority. His father's temper was a storm that no umbrella could survive, and his stepmother's indifference was a cold, unyielding wall. School offered no refuge either, teachers turned blind eyes to bruises, and classmates mocked what they couldn't understand. He kept his pain hidden in plain sight. A sleeve pulled down over scars that told a story words could not. A quiet corner in the library where no one would notice his trembling hands. Every day was a battle to survive, to pretend that the chaos around him wasn't breaking him from the inside. And yet, inside that small, fragile frame, a spark of defiance flickered. Ethan refused to let fear become his identity. But courage alone was never enough. When the stepmother's cruelty escalated, Ethan realized he couldn't escape it on his own. Nights were the hardest. He would lie awake, listening to the creak of the floorboards, the harsh laughter, the slamming doors, wondering if anyone in the world would ever see the bruises, the scars, the silent cries for help. He carried a notebook, a single, battered notebook filled with drawings, names, and notes detailing every instance of abuse. It was his evidence, his shield, and his voice when no one else would speak. The day he finally brought the notebook to court, he had imagined relief, perhaps even justice. He pictured a judge who would nod solemnly, acknowledge the pain, and hold the adults accountable. But reality was harsher than any fear he had felt at home. When he spoke, the courtroom didn't respond with empathy. Instead, it erupted in laughter, as if his words were a child's tale rather than a call for help. Every snicker, every smirk, hammered into him a deep, numbing despair. And yet, Ethan's spirit was not fully broken. Each insult, each dismissal, added to the fire burning in his chest. He remembered stories he had heard on the streets, about men who rode motorcycles not just for freedom, but for justice. Bikers who protected those the world had forgotten, who refused to let cruelty reign unchallenged. In the back of his mind, he clung to a single thought: maybe someone, somewhere, would see him. Maybe someone would fight for him when he could not fight for himself. Outside the courthouse, the air hung heavy with rain and anticipation. Ethan's heart thumped in rhythm with an unknown force. It was a feeling he had never trusted before, a mix of hope and fear. Something was coming, something that might finally turn the tide. He didn't yet know who they were, or how they would arrive, but he felt it in his bones. Change was coming. And when it did, the world would remember that a child's truth was never meant to be mocked. The judge slammed his gavel with a force that echoed like a death knell, but it wasn't justice he delivered, it was mockery. Ethan felt the weight of every sneer, every dismissive glance pressing down on him. His stepmother's smirk from the gallery cut deeper than any words. She knew she was untouchable, shielded by law, status, and the world's indifference. Lawyers shuffled papers, murmuring about insufficient evidence, as if Ethan's bruises in the meticulously kept notebook were nothing more than the imaginings of a scared child. Each statement from the opposition chipped away at his hope, leaving him exposed, raw, and shaking. He realized, in that cold courtroom, that the system meant to protect him was failing spectacularly. It wasn't just indifference, it was active cruelty disguised as protocol. Outside the courthouse, the storm raged harder. Rain lashed against the windows like the world itself was mourning, or maybe warning. The streets were slick with reflection, neon signs distorted in puddles, and the distant sound of tires on asphalt barely hinted at the storm to come. But in that moment, Ethan felt trapped. The walls of the courtroom weren't just wood and stone, they were iron bars, and the laughter of the judge was the lock. He tried to plead, tried to make his story tangible, understandable, undeniable, but every word seemed to vanish into a void. The threat was not just his stepmother, not just the judge, but the suffocating sense that no one would ever believe a child. The villain wasn't masked, it wore robes, sat on a bench, smiled at cruelty, and hid behind the law. And yet, even in this suffocating hopelessness, a spark of determination flickered. Ethan gripped his notebook tighter, refusing to let fear silence him completely. Somewhere, beyond the walls, engines roared faintly through the storm, a distant promise he could not yet see but could feel deep in his bones. Justice might have been absent here, but it was not gone. Not entirely. Something was coming. And when it did, the world would witness that even the smallest, weakest voice could ignite a reckoning. The gavel struck again, sharp and final, as if sealing Ethan's fate. The courtroom doors creaked shut, the judge's mocking smirk carved deep into the boy's memory. It felt like the end. But then, a vibration rippled through the silence. At first faint, then growing louder, stronger, until the very windows trembled. The murmurs in the gallery faltered. Even the judge's laughter stumbled, uncertain. The sound was unmistakable, engines, deep and thunderous, rolling like war drums through the rain-soaked streets. Every head turned as the heavy wooden doors of the courthouse groaned open. A gust of storm-soaked air swept in, carrying with it the smell of asphalt, oil, and leather. 13 figures emerged from the shadows outside, helmets dripping rain, boots striking against the marble floor, jackets bearing insignias that spoke of unity, loyalty, and brotherhood. They moved together as if bound by one heartbeat. Each step echoed with defiance, each glance a promise. These weren't ordinary bikers, they were guardians forged by fire, men and women who had seen the world's cruelty and vowed to fight it with roaring engines and unyielding hearts. The judge sat upright, his gavel raised, but his voice cracked when he barked, "What is the meaning of this?" The bikers didn't flinch. Their leader, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek and eyes that carried the weight of countless battles, stepped forward. He removed his helmet slowly, deliberately, placing it on the nearest bench. "Meaning," he growled, his voice steady as thunder. "The meaning is that this boy will not be laughed at today." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. For the first time, someone was speaking for him, not dismissing, not mocking, but standing. His trembling hands loosened their grip on the notebook as he watched the leader plant himself between the boy and the bench of power. The other 12 spread across the courtroom, not threatening, but protective, forming a wall of leather and steel around the boy. Their presence was overwhelming, not just because of their size or the sound of engines still growling outside, but because of what they represented, strength standing beside innocence. Ethan's eyes welled with tears he hadn't allowed himself to cry before. He had dreamed of this moment, of someone finally believing him, but he never imagined it would arrive in the form of 13 bikers defying the cold machinery of the courtroom. The judge stammered, demanding order, but the bikers' leader leaned closer, his voice low and unyielding. "Order is exactly what we're bringing. Justice. And justice doesn't laugh at children." The gallery shifted uneasily, whispers filling the air. The storm outside roared, as if nature itself approved of this intrusion. Ethan felt something he hadn't in years: safety. Hope. The kind that blooms only when you realize you're no longer alone. The 13 had come not for chaos, but for truth. And with every drop of rain that hammered the courthouse roof, it became clear, this was no longer just a trial. This was the beginning of a reckoning. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm outside. The judge's face, once smug and careless, now flushed crimson with a mix of anger and fear. His gavel struck the desk again and again, but its sound was drowned by the echo of rain against glass and the presence of 13 unshakable bikers filling the chamber. "This is contempt of court," the judge barked, his voice cracking under the weight of resistance he wasn't used to. "I demand you leave immediately." The leader of the bikers, Stone, a man whose reputation carried whispers of battles fought for the voiceless, stepped closer. His boots thudded against the polished floor as he stared directly into the judge's eyes. "Contempt of court," he said slowly, his voice like gravel, "is laughing at a child who's begging to be heard." A murmur rippled through the gallery. For the first time, the room leaned toward the boy, not away from him. Ethan's stepmother shifted uneasily, her confidence waning. Stone raised a hand, and one of the bikers, a woman with braided hair and piercing eyes, stepped forward. She placed Ethan's notebook on the judge's desk, her leather gloves leaving raindrops on the polished wood. "Every page in here is a truth this boy has carried alone," she said firmly. "And every scar on his body is proof of what your court chose to ignore." The judge tried to scoff, but his voice faltered. "Children exaggerate, they." "Show them," Stone interrupted, turning to Ethan. His voice softened, no longer thunder but steady rain. "You don't have to hide anymore. We're here." Ethan's hands trembled as he slowly pushed back his sleeves. The courtroom gasped. Bruises, old and new, painted his arms like a cruel mosaic. A silence so thick it suffocated swept through the chamber. No one laughed now. No one dared. The stepmother's face paled. She stood abruptly, hissing, "This is absurd. He did that to himself." But her words fell flat against the storm of evidence. Stone's gaze locked on her, cold and merciless. "Enough lies," he growled. Another biker stepped forward, pulling out photographs, pictures taken in secret by a neighbor who had long suspected the abuse. They laid them out on the desk for all to see. The gallery gasped louder, the air electric with outrage. Ethan's tears spilled freely now, but for once, they weren't born of despair. They were tears of release, of truth finally clawing its way into the light. The judge stammered, his authority crumbling. This isn't proper procedure." Stone slammed his fist on the desk, the sound cracking through the courtroom like lightning. "Neither is laughing at a child begging for help." His voice rose, uncontainable fury mixed with undeniable righteousness. "You've hidden behind rules and robes while monsters walk free. Not today." The bikers surrounded Ethan, their presence unyielding, their unity undeniable. The gallery erupted, half in outrage, half in support. The tide had turned. The stepmother shrank back, her mask of arrogance shattered, while the judge sat frozen, powerless before the storm he had tried to mock. In that moment, it wasn't the gavel that commanded authority. It was the boy's truth, carried by the roar of engines and the strength of 13 unbreakable souls who had walked in when the world had turned its back. Ethan raised his chin, his voice trembling but strong enough to pierce the silence. "I'm not lying. And I'm not alone anymore." The words hung in the air like a verdict. The storm outside broke fully then, thunder rolling, lightning cracking across the sky as if the heavens themselves were delivering judgment. The bikers stood tall, Ethan at their center, and for the first time in his young life, justice didn't feel like a distant dream. It felt real. It felt inevitable. The reckoning had arrived. The gavel never struck again. It sat abandoned on the judge's desk, useless against the roar of truth that had shattered the courtroom. The stepmother was escorted out, her protests drowned beneath the storm of outrage. For once, justice did not hide behind paperwork or excuses, it stood alive in the eyes of 13 riders and the trembling courage of one boy. When the doors finally opened, Ethan stepped out into the rain. But this time, it didn't feel cold. Each drop on his skin was a cleansing, washing away years of fear. His notebook, no longer a desperate plea for someone to listen, was now a testament of survival, proof that his voice mattered. The bikers flanked him as they walked down the courthouse steps. Engines rumbled to life, one by one, their thunder blending with the storm above. Crowds had gathered, whispers turning to cheers as they watched the boy climb onto the back of Stone's bike. For the first time, Ethan smiled, not the forced smile he used to hide pain, but a real one, fragile yet radiant. Stone glanced back at him, his scarred face softening. "You're safe now, kid. No one laughs at you again." The other bikers revved their engines in unison, a symphony of defiance and protection. They weren't there for glory. They weren't there for recognition. They were there because some truths were too important to be silenced, and some children too precious to be ignored. As the pack of 13 rolled out into the storm, with Ethan holding tight, the courthouse shrank behind them. They left no medals, no speeches, only the echo of engines and the memory of what it looks like when justice refuses to bow. And though they would vanish into the rain, their presence lingered in every heart that had witnessed the moment. Ethan was no longer just a boy with bruises and a broken voice. He was a survivor. And he would never stand alone again. Because sometimes, the loudest gavel isn't wood against wood, it's the roar of engines carrying truth through the storm. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, share it with friends, and subscribe for more powerful stories. Together, we can make sure no child's voice is ever silenced again.